We are talking health and wealth, actually. Obesity is often talked about as a personal health issue, but a new UA report is making the case it's also an economic issue. The report is called Beneath the Surface, the hidden socio-economic impact of weight loss. It was produced by Whiteshield, commissioned by Lilly. And it suggests that earlier and more effective obesity intervention in the country could help more than 1.2 million adults transition out of obesity by 2031. And the potential impact is significant. Number put at 1.5 billion in healthcare savings and productivity gains as well. So to tell us more, we've got Dr. Sarah Suleiman, who's a consultant endocrinologist, diabetologist, and a clinical lead for obesity, bariatrics and genetics at Imperial College London in the Diabetes and Endocrinology Centre. And in studio from Whiteshield, the advisory firm behind the report, we've got partner Tom Flynn. So much to unpack here. And of course, we've been talking about weight loss in various ways and guises and techniques a lot over the last few months. So, Sarah, I'd love to start with you, Doctor. We often think or hear about obesity described as a lifestyle issue, but doctors are increasingly saying it's a chronic illness. And I wondered, for you, as a consultant endocrinologist and diabetes expert, why is that distinction so important?
Hi, Helen. Thank you for having me on. What an excellent question. So I think, to go back to the root of it, no one wakes up in the morning thinking, I'd love to have obesity. It's not a lifestyle choice. It is a disease. And the reason it's a disease is in a small minority of people, there's a mutation that results in obesity. In the majority of people, it's not that straightforward in that they have tiny, tiny alterations in lots of genes, each of which will add 1 or 2 kilograms. And together they cause obesity. And they are impacted by things like the environment, how life has changed in the last 20, 30 years. But to give you a slightly different sort of focus on it, heritability is how likely are you to get a trait from your parents. And the most heritable trait is how tall you are. So if you have tall parents, you'll be tall. And if you have short parents, you'll be short. And the second most heritable is obesity. Even if you're then adopted by a different family, you will still look like your original parents. So it is absolutely not a lifestyle choice.
And Dr. Sarah, when we hear that phrase weight loss, I think a lot of us think about appearance, willpower, discipline, dieting, calories in, calories out. From your clinical experience, what are perhaps the bigger health issues beneath the surface that can help people understand that different solutions might be required to just counting calories?
So obesity has at least 200 diseases attached to it: diabetes, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, but also things like cancer and everything. And in some people, weight loss of just 5 or 10% can, for example, improve fertility. And although we speak about weight loss as calories in, calories out, it really isn't that simple at all. It needs to be tailored to the person in front of you. And there are some people, for example, who only have 10 kilos extra, but it's resulted in diabetes or it's affecting other things. And similarly, there are people who weigh 150 kilos or more who do not have diabetes or the more common complications. So
it's nuanced.
We've changed our focus.
Yeah.
We're looking at staging. It is nuanced, but also there are so many treatment options. And going back to your first question, one of the reasons we now recognize it's a chronic disease is there are successful treatments that have shown people, I've been struggling for 20 years, but now suddenly I've taken this medication and my weight has dropped 20 kilos.
Dr. Sarah Suleiman with us today. Any questions from the medical side, get in touch on 4001. And in the studio, Tom Flynn's with us, partner at Whiteshield, the firm behind the report. And it looked, Tom, not just at obesity as a health concern, Dr. Sarah talking there about it being a very serious one in some cases, but also an economic issue, which is very much your background. Why did you want to frame it that way?
So first, typically when there's the question about obesity and what is kind of that broader impact of obesity beyond health, it's typically viewed at a cost kind of level. What are the potential costs that we actually have to spend out in terms of, treatments for type 2 diabetes, for example, cardiovascular disease, along that type of line. Part of what we wanted to do is flip that and start to think, what are some of the benefits that you can actually get, you as a person, but more importantly, as within a society or economy, if we start to have different types of interventions and actually reduce rates of obesity. And we know from two different, kind of angles. So one, we know that this challenge is obviously global. It's been growing. Or now you've got 1 out of 8, adults, worldwide who are living with obesity. But then two, as Dr. Sarah was mentioning, that we have these new treatment methods for obesity. And part of it was starting to say, as we roll out these treatment methods across society and people, start to take them and, rates of obesity reduce, what are some of those broader socioeconomic impacts that we're looking to see?
And what are they? When you started delving into this, what were some of the headline numbers or stats that, when you went to a dinner party, you're like, do you know what? This is actually really interesting and perhaps far more impactful than we might have just thought about a new drug coming to market?
Sure. And part of the reason why we looked at in the report style is beneath the surface is because the first thing that everyone talks about is in terms of healthcare and actually health spending. And of course, that's a foundational way to look at it. So you talk about 1.5 billion, for example, within the UAE that can be saved by about now between, now and 2031. But beneath the surface is you start to see the other types of impacts as you actually reduce obesity rates. So on one hand, you actually have, people who are able to, be more present at work, fewer absences from work, for example, increasing the productivity, as you mentioned, before. You've got people who are able to actually complete more degrees, kind of at the university, level and below. You've got more people who actually can have different types of job choices, if you will, as well. So when you start to add all of these individual choices that come up, is you start to see these impacts at a society level. If we're talking about 1.2 million people who transition from living with obesity, to not. Mm-hmm. So that's when you start to get, 51 billion, for example, USD within the UAE in terms of impact. So that's about 1.5 percentage points increase of GDP.
5 additional
work
days.
For
it's
people.
Wild. As soon as you kind of start scratching that surface, as you say, Tom, you even think about things like, and this is going to sound like, as someone who's been in a bigger body, I used to weigh a lot more than this, feeling comfortable to go to a theme park, about travel, about being in the world, because we know that the impacts aren't just physical health, it's mental health as well. And that can only be a good thing. But, Dr. Sarah, something we've addressed on the show recently is obviously about GLP-1s and how transformative they can be for individuals' health. And I've had many a doctor on the show talking about, incredible accidental side effects, but also one side effect being muscle loss, about not using them properly. And I think that's something we need to address here. We're not just talking about losing weight is positive, but it's about losing weight in a way that is sustainable and healthy. What would you say to that in terms of, it's not just about getting the kilos off, it's about making sure you're doing it correctly and under supervision?
So that's another great question. More and more, we understand that health isn't just about the weight. And you're absolutely right. We worry about something called sarcopenic obesity, where people lose the muscle. And even though they're losing fat, it's problematic, particularly so in older adults. But actually, the good news is if you are able to maintain a decent protein intake, so over 1 gram per kilogram body weight, and have resistance exercise for at least 3 hours in a week, you maintain your muscle bulk even though you're losing weight, which is excellent. On the other hand, can we, because of muscle loss risk, not treat obesity? I think that's extremely short-sighted. It's been a problem in social media, and a lot of people are coming in saying, I'm not going to have the treatment, it's going to waste my muscles. Actually, you lose 80% fat, 20% muscle, and that 20% can be preserved with minimal lifestyle changes.
We're going to keep Dr. Sarah with us today, Tom Flynn in the studio as well. If you've got any questions, please do get in touch. Kind of curious to get Tom's take on why should policymakers, employers, economic planners pay attention when we look ahead? What could the impact be by 2031? And of course, for Dr. Sarah as well, for someone who has struggled with weight for years, practical first steps they can take.